Good afternoon, morning, evening, whatever time you're taking notes today. This is 10-10. You didn't think I would forget about all the biomes that are located in water. So these are aquatic biomes. We did all the land one, terrestrial ones. Now we're going to take a look at aquatic biomes. Aquatic biomes are usually classified by what type of water that, what type of water makes it up. You have saltwater, freshwater, and brackish water. Brackish is a mix between salt and fresh. So we're going to start out with the freshwater biomes. They're usually broken into flowing or standing still, because if it's freshwater, it can be on the move, like a river, a stream, or a brook, or it can be standing still, like a pond or a lake. Now, if you belong to one of these flowing freshwater biomes, you, as an animal or a plant, needs to deal with the fact that the water is constantly moving around you, and you could very easily be picked up and swooped away. So, if you are a plant or an animal, you need adaptations, and those adaptations are anything that you have that give you the ability to hang on to the rocks and prevent you from being carried downstream. A lot of animals that live in here usually have hooks or suckers on their body somehow in order to let them stay put and not get swooped downstream. But other things like nutrients and minerals do get picked up and carried downstream. So if we look at a mountain and say the snow is up here, the water that melts from the snow that begins going down is usually very clean and pure. Why? It hasn't picked up a whole lot of stuff on the way down. As it goes down the mountain and then eventually ends up in a pond, well, this pond is now full of stuff, full of nutrients, but it's also full of other animals that couldn't hold on, plants that couldn't hold on, and so on. So if you were out camping, hiking, and somehow ended up without water, I would not drink from the pond. No, because that's where all the junk has ended up. I would go straight from the source because it's less likely up there that it's going to be contaminated with any sort of extra goodies that you don't want in your water. Alright, next, standing freshwater. So we've got our flowing freshwater, we got our standing freshwater, such as lakes and ponds. What we find in lakes and ponds, the fact that, this is what got picked up and deposited along the way, we find lots of stuff called plankton. Not this guy, but they are tiny little organisms that float around in the water. There's two kinds of plankton. We have phytoplankton and zooplankton. Phyto has to do with light. So these are things that use light, which means that they use photosynthesis to make their own food. So right here, all these little unicellular algae bits are all relatively green because they do some sort of photosynthesis to make their own food. And then animals like fish will eat the algae because of the food that they have created themselves. We have zooplankton, zoo meaning animal, and so these are planktonic animals. So these are actually considered, thank you, Kira, lovely. These are actually little creatures. That looks like a little spider in there that we can find inside of the pond, which is actually eating the little phytoplankton or bacterial. So when we made our little biome bottles or our ecology bottles a way back, we had plankton. We had little animals and algae and stuff that were creating this little standing water ecosystem. Cool. Okay, wetlands is another type of standing freshwater ecosystem. Wetlands tells you pretty much exactly what it is. It's land that's wet. And what that means is that the surface of the land is either covered with maybe an inch of water, maybe 6 inches of water, usually not a whole bunch, maybe I think under a foot for part or the whole entire year. And what this does is it provides a home for lots of animals to live, little fishies and plankton and stuff in here, but also bigger animals. Due to the fact that we've got all these plants around here, that we can get bigger animals now that can survive there and feed on all the smaller animals inside. The most typical wetlands that you may be familiar with are things called bogs, marshes, and swamps. The wind's trying to blow down my umbrella. That's not good. And so if you go down to Newport, they have the Newport Back Bay. That's a wetland. and lots of birds live there just because of the plentiful amount of food that's available for them in the water. All right, then we have freshwater moving our way into saltwater. We call these little combos, and so they're kind of like where the fresh and salt waters meet each other. So where a stream comes and meets the ocean, where they blend together, that's what we're talking about. The first one is called an estuary. An estuary is where the wetlands meet the sea. It's relatively shallow, filled with a lot of primary producers. What does that mean? Plants. And detritus, a lot of junk, lots of dead stuff that got carried down the stream, end up down in here. We have salt marshes, which are basically estuaries that are found specifically in the temperate zone. And these are filled with really cool grasses that are able to handle a lot of excess salt. Because if you remember way back when we said that if you put a cell in a saltwater environment, the salt would suck all the water out of the cell, causing it to shrivel up and die. Well, plants, you would think, shouldn't be able to live in salty areas because they will also shrivel up and die. So these plants, these grasses here, are able to withstand or have something in their cell walls, something that allows them to be able to handle all this excess salt and not shrivel up and die. We have another type of estuary called a mangrove swamp. These guys are basically estuaries that are found in tropical regions. And these guys are really spiffy because they support these trees called mangroves. Here's the tree. Here's his roots above the water. Because if the roots were under the water completely, it would drown. It needs air. And so what is normally underground, so this would usually be the ground right here, all these roots that are above the air and below in the water and then underground provides homes for cool little like caiman alligators and crocodiles and stuff. Lots of birds, even sloths live in this area, and they'll come down one tree and swim through the swamp and then climb up another tree if they decide to live in a new spot. Okay, now saltwater. Now we're talking oceans. That's kind of a big area to define. So saltwater zones or oceans are usually divided two ways, vertically and horizontally. So we're going to start first with the vertical zones. So here's a nifty little map that kind of makes it easy to understand. The vertical zones of the ocean and the saltwater, we have two main zones. Right here, this light portion. This is where sunlight can actually work its way down and how far sunlight can go. That's called the photic zone. Makes sense. Photography, photosynthesis, light, the light zone. These are the well-lit upper areas where all the photosynthesis occurs. So all your phytoplankton, all your plants, all your algae is all found here. Not down here, they would die. No light. So from that point down, where the sunlight can't reach, which is usually the majority of the ocean, is the aphotic zone, which is always dark. And this is where we have a lot of chemosynthetic autotrophs. Because of the fact that there's no sunlight, they need chemical energy, usually from vents from under the bottom of the ocean, that will create the energy needed for them to make their own food. So vertically speaking, we have the photic and aphotic zone. Now the aphotic zone does have this special little area right here called the benthic zone, which is basically just the bottom of the ocean. So the benthic zone is just the very bottom of the ocean, which could be super deep or not so deep, depending on where in the ocean we're looking. Now the benthic zone, because there is no sunlight, they depend on food from above to fall down. So they're like, like manna from heaven kind of thing. And so they just wait for things to fall down, and then they love to eat detritus. These are the scavengers. These are the detritivores of the ocean world. They just wait for dead stuff, and they just mow on it and love it. The animals that live down at the bottom, we just call those benthos, not Mentos, the fresh maker, but benthos because they live on the benthic zone. These are animals that live either attached to or near the bottom of the ocean, like sea stars, anemones, and marine worms. So I found this picture showing just some common benthos that you can find down at the bottom of the ocean. All right. Now, go back. There you go. Horizontal zones, because the ocean is pretty big. It goes from coast of one continent to coast of another. So the horizontal zones in the ocean can also be divided as well. The first one is called the intertidal zone, and that's from dry land out to where low tide goes. So here's the highest high tide, down here is the lowest low tide, And then from that point forward, it's always underwater. But this tidal zone here, the intertidal zone, these animals and plants have to deal with a lot of crap if you think about it. Half the day they're exposed to the hot, dry sun. Half the day they're completely underwater. They've got waves pounding on them all the time. They've got school groups picking at them all the time. They got a lot to deal with. And so the intertidal zone, they've got to deal with a lot. So they have all sorts of cool adaptations to deal with the dry times, the wet times, the crashing waves. You ever try to pull a mussel off of a rock? It's darn near impossible, because they have these ability to hold on to stuff super tight, so that way the waves don't break them off and make them go away. Now the thing is, the animals that live in this upper zone, they're in the air, say 90% of the time, whereas these guys are like 10% of the time. So these guys up here need to deal with a lot of air, not so much water. Whereas these guys down here need to deal with a lot of water, not so much air. So what we end up seeing is little patterns, banding patterns of creatures that live in particular zones. And so it creates something called zonation. So the zoning of, and you can even see it here, that it creates little patterns of who lives where. So these guys down here are used to being underwater most of the time. They would not survive up here, and vice versa. So the zonation is a horizontal banding pattern of organisms that live in a particular habitat in the tidal zone. So it's kind of funny how this little 10-foot section right here provides, 5, 6 different habitats for these creatures, and they're very particular as to who lives where. So if I took this guy, put him down here, he'd probably drown and die. So pretty spiffy. All right, coastal zones. That's the intertidal zone. From the highest high tide to the lowest low tide. That is the intertidal zone. But then we have what's called the coastal zone, which goes from the lowest low tide out to the edge of the continental shelf. So we are being on a continent, we're on a big plate that connects with an oceanic plate, which is this one down here. And where they connect, there's this big thing, the drop-off, where Nemo goes and touches the butt. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. So we have this continental shelf, and this is where the coastal zone is. So from here to here is a coastal zone. This is where we find lots of neat stuff. This is where your kelp forest is, especially here off the coast of California. Big collection of brown algae that can grow 50 centimeters a day. That's ridiculous. That's like 2 feet. It's crazy. Could you imagine if a person grew 2 feet a day? That'd be kind of scary. Okay, no, that would be scary. This is also where you would find your Australia. Oh, reef. I'm like, what's that word? The Great Barrier Reef. This is where you would find all your coral reefs as well. Coral reefs love this warm, shallow water because of the fact that they get sun. So a lot of photosynthetic algae here. The only problem is they're very sensitive to changes in the temperature of the water, the salinity, the pH of the water, and of course, if we humans get in there, go, that's so cute, I want to take a piece of that home with me. We really mess with the coral reef. So the coral reef is a good indication as to the health of the ocean. Okay, and then we have the open ocean, which is, remember how it went continental shelf and then the drop-off and then that? So that's from the drop-off to the drop-off on the other side of the ocean. That's the open ocean. So it begins at the continental shelf and extends outward. That's pretty much 90% of the ocean's chunk is all open ocean. Now we think that in the open ocean is where we get whales and stuff like that, and that's true, but overall, very low nutrient levels because the majority of it is aphotic. It's very small producers because the photic zone is so teeny tiny, but it contains fish and mammals of all sizes because they have the ability to go up into the photic zone to get food and then go down when they want to chill or relax or get away from big predators. Here's a couple of guys that hang out in the open ocean. This is a Dumbo. Frick. See what happens when I think I know stuff off the top of my head. I don't. The squid. Squid. He's a Dumbo squid. That's his siphon, not his nose. He breathes through that thing, kind of. Well, water goes in and out through there. And then we have this cool nettle jellyfish, which is very dangerous, very bad. All right, so actually, let me just draw a little picture real quick. Here's the ocean. So here's one continent, goes down to the next continent. So we got the tidal zone, we got the coastal zone, open ocean, coastal zone, Oops. And then tidal zone again. So you can see it goes on both sides. So if this is, North America over here, the west coast, then this would be, east coast of Asia, like that. All right, guys, I think that's it. So we'll call it quits. And if you have any questions or anything, let me know tomorrow. Thanks. Bye.